I had just stepped into the hotel doors when I heard her voice clearly. Oh, good, the handyman finally arrived. She wasn't speaking to me directly, she said it about me. Quiet enough to pretend it was private, but loud enough that people near her heard it and laughed. I stopped in the middle of the lobby. I was wearing my best dress shirt. My shoes were polished earlier that morning until they shined, and in that moment, at 64 years old, I suddenly felt like an unwanted stranger who had walked into the wrong place. What made it worse was not just the words, it was who said them. That woman was going to become my son's mother-in-law, and she wasn't the only one looking at me that way. For a second, I thought about turning around and leaving. My body already started to turn toward the exit. But then my son appeared. He moved through the crowd, came close, and leaned toward my ear. Dad, trust me, just tonight. That was all he said. No explanation, no details. Just that sentence and a look in his eyes I had never seen before. I had no idea what was coming. Neither did they. My name is Raymond Cobb. People call me Ray. I am 64 years old. I live on 32 acres outside Conroe, Texas, about 40 miles north of Houston in Montgomery County. Out there, the pine trees take over, the roads get quiet, and the houses are far apart enough that you can hear your own thoughts. I was born here. My father worked this same land before me. He was a pipe fitter on oil rigs and also kept cattle when he could. I started working young too. At 18, I went into field work. I spent more than 20 years doing maintenance on drilling equipment. When I retired at 55, I came back home. I kept cattle, grew vegetables, and maintained a small pecan orchard that still gives me trouble every year. It's not fancy work. It doesn't impress strangers, but it's honest work. It is mine. Every piece of it was earned with my own hands. I've had calluses on my palms since I was a child. My wife Lorraine was the strongest person I ever knew. Quiet, sharp, and honest about people in a way most people are not. She could meet someone for 5 minutes and understand their nature better than others would in years. We raised 2 children together. My daughter Simone is 31 now, married to a school teacher named Gerald, living in Houston with their son Theo, who is the brightest little kid I know. My son Darius is 33, a civil and agricultural engineer. He went to Prairie View A&M on scholarship. The day he graduated was one of the proudest days of my life. The first was the day he was born. The second was his graduation. The third was holding Lorraine's hand in the hospital before she passed away. She died 2 days later from sudden heart failure. That was 5 years ago, and even now, it still hits me when I least expect it. After she was gone, Darius and I grew closer. He came to the farm almost every weekend. We worked together, ate together, and talked for hours. He had a good career consulting on irrigation and land systems across Texas. But more than that, he showed up. That mattered most. About 1.5 years ago, he brought someone home. Her name was Vanessa Hartwell. She came from Scottsdale, Arizona, the kind of wealthy background that doesn't need to announce itself loudly because it shows in small details. Her father, Preston Hartwell, ran a large real estate holding company. Her mother, Claire, was deeply involved in social circles and charity boards. At first meeting, Vanessa was polite and smiling. Nothing obviously wrong, but I learned long ago to pay attention to eyes more than smiles. Lorraine used to say, "Eyes don't practice, smiles do." Vanessa's eyes looked at me like she was taking inventory. My clothes, my hands, my home, everything. Not rude, just measuring. I told myself I was overthinking it. I kept quiet because Darius was happy. Then I met her parents. Preston and Claire Hartwell had a way of making any room feel smaller the moment they entered it. I visited their home in Scottsdale once. Huge house. Expensive cars I didn't recognize. Everything polished and controlled. Preston shook my hand like it was part of a routine. Claire asked about my farm in a way that sounded polite but carried judgment underneath. She even called it a pastoral lifestyle. I understood exactly what she meant. Still, I stayed calm because my son was happy. Then came the engagement dinner in Houston at the Four Seasons. It was a large event, many guests, everyone dressed perfectly. I arrived a little late because of the drive and morning work, but I had cleaned myself up properly. Ironed shirt, polished boots, tried to look my best. And that's when I heard it again. Vanessa leaned toward her mother and said softly, but clearly enough, "Oh good, the handyman finally made it." Some people laughed quietly, others looked away. The room shifted in that uncomfortable way people do when they witness something rude but don't want to react. I stood there frozen. For a moment, I considered leaving. One step already moved toward the door. Then I thought about Lorraine. I thought about my son. And then Darius was suddenly beside me. He leaned in and said again, "Dad, trust me, tonight." So I stayed. The dinner went on. I sat with some of Darius's colleagues. They were decent people. They spoke to me normally, but I could still feel eyes from across the room. Preston Hartwell watched me like I had already been categorized and dismissed. After most guests left, Darius came to me and asked me to walk outside. We sat inside his truck in the parking structure. He closed the doors and stayed quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dad, I need to show you something. Don't react until I finish." He opened his phone. There were multiple audio files, each labeled with dates. He played the first one. Vanessa's voice came through clearly. 6 weeks, Mom. Then I'm in. Once we're married, I start working on the property situation. Dad already has buyers ready. Then Claire's voice. "And if he refuses?" Vanessa replied lightly, almost laughing. "He trusts his son completely. Darius will get him to sign anything." I felt my stomach drop. They were talking about my land, my 32 acres, land that had been in my family and worked by me for decades. Darius explained everything slowly. A highway extension plan had been approved quietly in the county. That meant land value in the area would multiply several times in a few years. Preston Hartwell knew. He had planned it. He had been trying to gain control of my property through Vanessa and the marriage. There were more recordings, conversations, documents, even forged papers with my signature. Everything carefully planned. I just sat there, holding the phone, unable to speak. After a long silence, I finally asked, "What do you want to do?" Darius looked at me and said, "We stopped them. Properly." The next morning, I met him again. He introduced me to one of his friends, Devin, who worked with audio and video systems. Together, they prepared everything for the wedding ceremony. They arranged a projection setup at the venue, hidden in plain sight. It was presented as a romantic photo display, but it wasn't romance. It was evidence. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just sat in my room thinking about my father, my land, my wife, and everything I had built slowly over a lifetime. The next day, I put on my suit and went to the wedding. The hall filled with guests. Everything looked elegant and perfect on the surface. The Hartwell family arrived like they owned the space. Preston stood confident. Claire looked calm and controlled. Vanessa entered in a white gown, smiling like everything was already won. But Darius stood at the front quietly waiting. I knew my son. He was calm, but steady, in a way that meant he had already made his decision. The ceremony began. When it was time for vows, Darius raised his hand. "Before I answer," he said clearly, "there is something everyone here needs to see." The room went still. The screen behind him turned on. At first, people didn't understand what they were seeing. Then Vanessa's voice filled the hall. The same conversations, the same plans, the same words about my land. The room slowly changed. Confusion became shock. Shock became silence. People started realizing what they were hearing. Preston stood up immediately. "This is fake. Turn it off." But more recordings followed. His own voice, meetings, plans about land value, timing, legal manipulation, then more clips. Vanessa laughing about pretending to care. Claire discussing how long they would need to keep up appearances. The room broke into chaos. Some guests stood up, some left, others just sat frozen. Vanessa started crying. "This is not real. You're twisting everything." But Darius spoke calmly. "Every file has been verified. Forensic analysis confirmed it. And those property documents you submitted, they are forged." The truth hung in the room like something heavy that nobody could escape. Preston tried to speak again, but no one was listening anymore. Claire sat down slowly, her face pale. For the first time, their control was gone. And I just stood there, watching my son finish what he had started, not with anger, but with truth. I said no, because I believed that whoever came after us, and there would always be someone after us, deserved not to go through the same thing. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The defense tried to present Darius as a bitter former fiancé who had created an elaborate revenge story from nothing. It was a clever argument, but it had no foundation to stand on. You cannot claim manipulation when your own voice is on certified recordings. You cannot deny reality when your own written records are checked by experts in handwriting. You cannot dismiss a pattern when 5 different people, from different cities and different years, all describe the same chain of events in detail. The verdict came back, guilty on all charges. Preston Hartwell received 11 years, Claire received 7, Vanessa received 9. In her final statement, the judge said something that I later wrote down on a small piece of paper I keep near the kitchen window, the one that looks out across the land. She said, "The assumption this family made, that dignity is worthless, that integrity can be controlled, and that a man's value depends on his status or address, was the exact mistake that brought them here." Darius returned home to the farm, not as an escape, but as a choice. He often said that the city felt like he had been trying out a version of life that was never truly his, constantly trying to impress people who were keeping score in a game he never agreed to play. Now he works remotely as a consultant and manages the irrigation systems on the property. 2 years ago, he married a woman named Tanya, a soil specialist from Huntsville, who arrived on their 3rd date wearing work boots and has never once made me feel like I was out of place in my own home. They were married on the land, under the pecan trees, surrounded by about 40 people who truly knew and cared about them. It was the most peaceful and meaningful day I have experienced since Lorraine. What this experience taught me is something I did not understand at first, and I don't say it as a simple lesson, but as something I had to learn the hard way. People who try the hardest to reduce your worth are often the ones most afraid of what you represent. Vanessa Hartwell did not call me the handyman because she believed it was true. She said it because she needed it to be true in her mind. She needed me to be smaller so that what she was doing would feel acceptable, so she could tell herself it was not personal, not cruel, just necessary or business. The mistake many people make when they are treated like that is that they turn the blame inward. They start asking what they could have done to earn more respect, or how they could have behaved differently. But the truth is, there was nothing to fix. The problem was never your worth. What Darius understood, what everyone else only began to understand when the recordings played in that courtroom, is that truth does not need permission. It does not wait for the right moment, the right audience, or the right setting. It only needs someone willing to stand still and let it be seen. And the question I want you to think about is not meant as judgment, but as reflection. Is there a place in your life where you are making yourself smaller just to keep someone else comfortable? And if so, how long are you willing to keep doing that? I am 64 years old. My hands are marked with years of work. I have a pecan orchard behind my home and a son who comes by for dinner several nights a week. I wake up before sunrise, I work until my body tells me to stop, and I sleep without worry or pretense. That is the only inheritance I ever cared about building. That is everything I wanted to leave behind. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment and tell me. Type 1 if you believe Darius was right to expose the Hartwells publicly during the ceremony in front of everyone. Type 2 if you would have accepted the settlement of $300,000 and walked away quietly. There is no shame in that choice. Or type 3 if you would have left the moment you heard those words and never looked back again. I will read every response. Also tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. Sometimes someone is watching these words at 2 in the morning in a place I would never expect, and somehow it is exactly what they needed to hear. If this story reached you in some way, I am glad you stayed. I share stories like this regularly, and you are welcome to come back for the next one. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Houston, Texas, to create original content. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.